The most popular colour film simulation on the Ricoh GR cameras is positive film, so I thought I'd shoot it against some real positive film to compare. It's called slide or positive film because the development process creates a positive film strip rather than the negative C41 process. I wanted something as close to naturalistic as possible for the comparison, so I decided to shoot a roll of Provia, which is seen as being quite balanced, not quite as cool as Ektachrome and not quite as oversaturated as Velvia. So this is the positive film image control for the GR3s and the GR4. The GR2 is a little bit different. I'm using the factory settings and I'm going to switch the white balance just as a control to 5000. That's because obviously film is going to maintain the same white balance throughout. You can obviously correct it afterwards. I'm then going to put the ISO to 100, so we're shooting at the same speed. And then in peripheral illumination correction, I'm going to keep highlight corrections on, but I'm switching shadow correction off.
Right there.
So a quick question for you, which one is the Provia? I edited the white balance a little bit so that they'd be a bit more similar, but actually the dynamic range, I think GR has done an amazing job of capturing this quite limited dynamic range, which gives really contrasty shots. You can see, even having tried to balance it, the skies aren't exactly the same. The one on the right here is the GR4. So if I take away, I applied about 12 grain, and if I reset the white balance to what I was shooting at and what came back from the Noritsu scanner on the left with the Provia, you can see we've got much more green in the Ricoh, more magenta in the Provia. Slightly reset the histogram because they gave me a flat scan. It's kind of useful to think in these terms because there is a lot of manipulation you can do when you get film photos back. Sometimes people talk about as if the scan is the finished product, and there was always a lot of processing going on. And obviously if you want to get into the lab and develop your own and scan your own, you have even more control. So there are things you can do to kind of try and bring it back to what you really saw on the day. What you can't do, this shadow detail in the raw file is so much clearer than in the slide film. The slide film is famously quite narrow in terms of how you expose it. You don't get a huge amount of tolerance between the darkest and the lightest areas. There's about 5 stops of dynamic range. I wanted to show you this other one though, because even if you try and white balance as much as you can, you're not going to get exactly the same look because there's a kind of non-linear relationship between the colors. So it's not all about white balance. What I'm doing here is I'm just setting the low and the high points. So blue or green at the low end and red at the top end. The moment just the start to clip, that's probably the most contrast that you're going to get without losing any detail. So I'm just balancing it a bit. It did feel really sunny here, so I love that it's captured these kind of very buttery yellows on the building. Now I'm kind of balancing on the right, but as you can see, I can make it as yellow as I want. It's not going to be exactly the same really. I would put more magenta into what I have been using for the positive film though, if I wanted to get closer to Provia. My guess is that they're using something like Ektachrome as part of their reference for creating the positive film profile, because it did feel quite sort of white and even slightly tending towards green. I kind of like both of these. They had this elf in the corner, but they are quite different from each other. If I pull the black point down, I start to get a bit more of the contrast that you see in the Provia. But to give you one really stark example of how the colours don't map exactly onto one another, I had this weird like ice cream shop with a Johnny Depp kind of, I guess they maybe painted it a few years ago. And you can see in the red up top, the Provia on the left looks pretty orange. And actually fiddling with the white balance, I'm going to kind of use the wall as a reference point here. And you can get the wall pretty close, but the reds don't match up. Which is all to say that you're never going to get a complete color map of at least this particular film stock with Ricoh GR. One thing I think you can do though is to try and be true to the spirit of positive film. One of the things that's really exciting, I think, when you're shooting with this is that you get that amazing look for, particularly for landscapes. I love it for landscapes and for nature. And trying to stay true to that. In Lightroom, I'd do a couple of things like pull the blacks down, maybe slightly increase the contrast. And then I'm going to white balance it for what we've already seen, building in a little bit more magenta than there already was there. I just want to do, I think this will probably look good as a 2x1. I love how much contrast comes out of the sky already and how much you get these kind of beautiful colors. I'm not going to pull back any shadows or pull down any highlights. I'm going to try and stay true to the sort of contrasty nature of positive film. What I could do in Lightroom is maybe do a kind of light color grading, so making the shadows even bluer or more purpley, and making the highlights a bit more yellowy, orangey. Maybe a little bit of extra vibrance. But if this has taught me anything when it comes to the recipe, you actually can't go far wrong with the settings that they already give you. Probably add 12 or 13 grain here. So my recipe recommendation to make something that looks really like Provia, I would say it sticks pretty close to the defaults for the Ricoh positive film. I'll put it up here, and if you want to see more of these, then subscribe. I'm gonna do Cinestill next, I think. Cheers guys.